So let's talk about one of the key issues that has cropped up for the domestic Israeli population, all Israelis, and that is the problem of radicalization of the Arab population inside of Israel. So during this last coalition government, which lasted approximately a year, I was frankly shocked that it lasted that long. The big kind of pitch to the world is that there was an Arab party that was part of the coalition, the Ra'am party, and then of course the Ra'am party refused to vote in favor of the continuing application of military rule to Jewish settlements, so-called settlements in the West Bank, places like Efrat that have 30,000 citizens, and the coalition government fell based on that. There's been a lot of talk for a long time in the West about the treatment of Arabs inside of Israel. The fact is that obviously an Arab party did sit in, there are several Arab parties actually in Knesset. There was one that was a member of the coalition, but the radicalization of the Israeli Arab population is of increasing concern. During the last Gaza conflict, one of the biggest problems was this massive riot that happened in Lod, in which there were literally Israeli Arabs walking around attempting to burn synagogues. What can be done to fight this? I mean, listen, I'm a relative stranger to Israel. As I say, I've only visited here 4 times, but you can sense that there's a massive difference between the Israeli Arab portions of Jerusalem, for example, and the Jewish areas of Jerusalem. If I'm walking around in Mamilla, there are many Israeli Arabs who are walking around unmolested. If I were to walk with my family wearing my yarmulke down to the Damascus Gate, it would be a serious security problem. So how exactly is that gap bridgeable?
Well, first of all, correction. The Ram party, you say, was against an item that you mentioned. The Ram party is the Muslim Brotherhood Party. They have a governing council, a shura council, that is of the Muslim Brotherhood, okay? And the Muslim Brotherhood supports Hamas. And many other radical, and there are no countries in the Middle East, with the exception of Turkey and Qatar, all the Arab countries banned the Muslim Brotherhood. What happened in the last government, in order to eke out a majority, the government that promised not to do this, the people who came into power, promised that they wouldn't go with the Muslim Brotherhood, and they promptly violated that promise and brought them into the government, which is unbelievable because they're against the Jewish state. They're against Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. That's their professed ideology. Sometimes they deliver it in a soft-spoken manner, but that's it. They gave him tons of money, 50 billion shekels, an enormous amount of money, some of it going through NGOs that are associated with Hamas. It's insane. I mean, this was such a violation, not only of campaign promises, but of just of common sense. You can't do that. And that obviously raised expectations of the more radical wing in the Israeli Arab population, and that expressed itself in these in many manifestations that you're talking about. But there's no question there is a race in the Middle East as a whole, and a race inside Israel between what I call are the modernists and the medievalists. Okay, the medievalists want to take you back to militant Islam, to really a dark period in the history of the world, and the modernists want to be incorporated in the modern state of Israel, to partake of the extraordinary success that you see around you. And they have doctors, they have nurses, they have pharmacologists, they have high-tech entrepreneurs. They want to be there. The other guys want to take them back, okay, and dissolve the state of Israel or destroy it. And we have to make sure that the modernists win out over the medievalists. My government, you'd be surprised to know, gave an enormous amount of money, and I, wasn't doing it for votes. I did it because I believe in this, in helping the right side on this battle. Enormous amount of money, about $25 billion shekels. Okay, but I gave it not to NGOs, Hamas NGOs. I invested in roads, in infrastructure, in education, in the Arab communities. And I'm a Likud guy, right? By the way, you'd be surprised. I received about 10% of the Arab vote. Okay, actually today in the recent polls, the Likud under me receives more Arab votes than all the Jewish parties together. Okay, why? Because many of them want to be part of this modernization and this success story. And I think if you ask me what is the answer to that, I think, beefing up security against the radicals and against the, against lawbreakers is important. But equally important is you want to move them into help as much as you can to give them enterprise, opportunity, education, law, and order that they want in their communities. And that's the program that I began, and the program that, God willing, I'll continue when I get in. It's a big battle. But it's the same battle you see in the Middle East. It's Iran and in Iraq and in Syria. and in Yemen as opposed to what is happening in the Gulf. Look at what happened in the Gulf. Look at what happened there. I mean, it's a fantastic example of enterprise and initiative. It just changed the whole way people think about the Arab world. And the Arab world has to go there and not to Yemen, okay? And Israeli Arabs have to go to here, to what you see around you, and not to Yemen.
So I want to ask you some questions about the state of the West more broadly, because obviously Israel is a key player in the West. In many ways, it's the tip of the sphere in a very unfriendly place in the world. But it seems like the international left is obviously increasingly anti-Israel, not just in America, but sort of generally speaking, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn and formerly the head of the Labour Party in the UK, or in multiple parties across Europe. It seems as though a lot of the ire against Israel is not directed against Israel per se. It's directed against nationalism more broadly. The idea that there should be a nation as part of a nation state, which I think underlies a lot of the rage about the fact that Israel passed a nation state law, recognizing that Israel is a Jewish state, which is what it always said that it was.
So, with equal rights to everyone, non-Jews. The only thing that, you know what the nation state, the Jewish state means? That any Jew can come to Israel automatically. That's all. That's really the main thing that it means. Why? Because for thousands of years, or almost 2,000 years, a little less, we were absolutely stateless and countryless, and we paid the biggest price that any people paid in the history of mankind, or humanity, as we say today, okay? All right? So, so if you're a Jew and you don't have a place to go, you can come to Israel. That's what the nation state means. Inside, everyone's the same. Everyone is the same. There are no differences. Equal under the law.
So when you talk about the Jewish state...
And that's the only place, by the way, where Arabs enjoy equality under the law, because the rest are not democracies. And when people condemned Israel as an apartheid, I said, what are you talking about? If you're a Christian, or you're a homosexual, or you're a woman, in the Arab societies, in the Palestinian areas, you live in medieval times. In Hamas, people go to support Hamas. Hamas executes people who deviate from the strict rule that they impose, including the Quranic rule. What are you talking about? Israel is the beacon of democracy, attacked, defending itself, maintaining a democracy inside, the rule of law, equality. What are these people? Are these people mad? And the answer is yeah, they're quite mad. They're quite mad. It's so obvious. And you know who understands that best? The Arabs. The Arabs understand it. The Arabs around Israel. I have fan clubs in the Emirates and in Saudi Arabia. Well, that's interesting, because they understand it too. They want a better life.
It is fascinating how Israel has become sort of the point of contention here. There's no other state on earth where people actually have a conversation about whether it ought to exist or not. Israel seems to be the only one. And in terms of sort of what people will accuse Israel of ethnic solidarity, despite the fact that, again, Jews are quite diverse. I mean, you have Ethiopian Jews and you have Moroccan Jews, like my wife.
Yeah, some apartheid. I personally brought tens of thousands of black Jews from Ethiopia to Israel. I mean, the whole thing is ridiculous. But if you ask me, what is the genesis of the progressive left's antipathy to Israel? It's their antipathy to certain Western values that we hold dear. You talk about nationalism, which by itself is not negative and quite positive. It helps build, communities. It's like, are families bad? Are families bad? You think families are bad? Well, hey, come on. You're preferring your children to other children. That's bad. Okay. Well, we know human society is organized around families, and the families are organized around nation states. And the nation states, like families, can cooperate with one another. Or unfortunately, because human nature is not uniform, they're bad people and they're bad nations. Well, you have to fight the bad and promote the good, right? That conception of how we organize the world is very different in the progressive left. And I think in many ways they hate Israel because they hate America. All right? Now, if you hate America, you're going to hate Israel. If you love America, you're going to like Israel. And you know who believes that? The Islamists. I mean, what does Iran say? It says, when they attack Israel, they say, we are you. That means Americans. Israelis are Americans, and Americans are Israelis. In a broad way, they're right. These are the values of freedom, of democracy, of individual choice, of pluralism. These ideas are things that are completely anathema to them. They want this regimented medieval world. And in a peculiar way, the association of the medievalists and their partners in the West. Who are their partners? The progressives join these Islamist radicals in attacking anything that's not only Israelis, but also anything that's Western. It's crazy.
So in a second, I want to ask you a few final questions, particularly about your brand new memoir, which is coming out, which is really exciting. I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you also about what Judaism means in a Jewish state. How much should religion play into the governance and that sort of thing? If you want to hear the Prime Minister's answers, you have to be a Daily Wire member. Head on over to dailywire.com/Sunday. You can click that link in the episode description. Use code Ben for 25% off. Hear the rest of our conversation over there.
Well, before we talk about that, I just want to say that we're in the midst of a global crisis. Global economic crisis. And I think that the advantage that we have in Israel, it's a small country, so you can be a nimble mammal among the dinosaurs, and you can weave out of conflict, extricate yourself from economic crisis very quickly. In 2003, when we had the aftermath of the dot-com collapse, I made this huge program that I talked to you about. Fat man, thin man, these 80 or more reforms that got Israel first out and produced this spectacular growth. Then in 2008-9, when I came in, we had the subprime global crisis. And you know what I did there? Actually, the opposite. Because our banks were conservative and we weren't at risk. And I decided to, instead of bailing out companies left and right, I said, well, I'll be bailing out failed companies. Why should I do that? So I went in a much more modest way and gave loan guarantees, very measured. So if you're a failing company, you didn't get the benefit and didn't get the incentive to continue to fail. And we got out of that one first in the world. Then in 2020, when we had the COVID crisis, it wasn't only a health crisis, which we also got out first in the world, but it was an economic crisis. There we had very cheap credit. So I gave a lot of companies that didn't fail, that were just hit by COVID, lifted them out. And I think that there is a way to deal with the global inflation problem in a way that Israel uniquely is able to do. And I'm keeping that for my election. I'll tell you about it later.
Well, that is Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You should check out his brand new memoir. Bibi is not out yet, but when it is, it's going to be a must-buy. Prime Minister, it's an honor to sit with you.
Thank you. Good to talk to you.